Hello, everyone. This is Gene Geog History, and today I'm going to talk about the Browning class, which I slightly mentioned in my last video, but I want to delve into it a bit more here. So, obviously, in places like the United States and even Canada, they have biracial people are acknowledged, but they're not really given their own census category, and that's for a plethora of reasons, mainly due to the one drop rule, which is just archaic and stupid, and I could just go on an entire rant about that. But in the Caribbean, that's not really a thing at all. And in the Caribbean, especially in Jamaica, they have the Browning class instead, which is its own official racial category in Jamaica, and there are versions of this in other countries of the Caribbean. So I heard about this a couple months ago, and I wanted to delve into what it is. As you see here, I asked ChatGPT about this discussion, and I started with, what is the Browning class in Jamaica? Please cite your sources. I emphasize citing the sources because I want a direct link to what they're using because ChatGPT isn't the most accurate. And when you cite the sources, you can often just click the source or highlight it and it will show up. So you see Wikipedia's a reference, Vanderbilt University is, and it mentions the social class in Jamaica. Haiti Progress, Jamaican perspective on colorism. Browning, the patois definition of it using Jamaican patois, and ResearchGate, which titles a 2000 article regarding the Browning class. So I'm going to use this and just my general knowledge outside of that for this video. The term Browning class in Jamaica refers to a historically significant social group characterized by lighter skin tones, typically of mixed African and European ancestry. This group has traditionally occupied an intermediate position in Jamaica's racial and social hierarchy, situated between the white elite and the predominantly black majority. Historical context. During the colonial era, Jamaica's society was stratified along racial lines. The white elite, mainly of the English, held the highest status, while the black population, largely descendants of enslaved Africans, despite occupying the majority of the population, occupied the lowest. The quote unquote Browning class, comprised of individuals of mixed race, often served as a buffer between these two groups, which obviously makes sense because they are the product of both of them. They were sometimes afforded privileges such as better education, skilled employment, and property ownership, distinguishing them from the black majority. For instance, the 1871 Jamaican census recorded 100,346 individuals as colored, now referred to as the Browning class. And we're definitely going to get into the tie of the color term and the Browning class, compared to the 392,707 classified as black. So just from that data, the colored Browning class is a fourth, smaller. Actually, no. Technically they're a fourth smaller than the black class, and the black class is 4 times bigger than the colored Browning class. Contemporary implications. In modern Jamaica, the legacy of the stratification persists. The Browning class, though a minority, continues to hold a disproportionate share of economic power and influence. They are often associated with the middle and upper class, occupying significant roles in business, politics, and academia. This dynamic contributes to ongoing discussions about colorism and social inequality in the country. So I know people from Jamaica who've stated that people who are darker skinned aren't allowed to work in like banks and stuff because they're seen as lower class, where people who are lighter skinned are seen as worthy of being workers in the banks and politics and stuff because their skin tone is quote unquote cleaner and more higher class. The colorism is ridiculous. Cultural significance. The term Browning is also embedded in Jamaican culture and language. In Jamaican patois, browning refers to a person with light or fair skin. This term has been popularized in music and media, often highlighting societal preferences for lighter skin tones. The prominence of the browning class in Jamaican society reflects the enduring impact of colonial era racial hierarchies. Their position continues to influence social dynamics, economic opportunities, and cultural perceptions within the country. So, one element, and it's a pretty large element, in my opinion, of the term that really confuses me is that they use mixed race and light skinned very interchangeably. No matter what source I use, no matter what source I look at, some definitions will say that it's specifically a light skinned person. Another source will say it's specifically for mixed race people, specifically the mixed black and white mix. But as we should know, being being mixed race does not mean that you are light skinned, and being light skinned does not mean that you are mixed race. But due to the heavy association with a mixed person, most likely being lighter skinned, it kind of makes those terms interchangeable, which is honestly kind of annoying. And there's really no clarity on this. But just from what I could briefly recap, so the aspect of the term browning from a colloquial element is that it's a light skinned person, regardless of precise racial ancestry, because it's the light skin that is the symbol of higher class, and the term browning is mainly about class and the tools of it that makes you middle or upper class. Now, on to the aspect of the Browning class from a social point of view. It is middle to upper class Jamaicans who are predominantly light skinned, often mixed race. Emphasis on the often because it's associating light skinned and mixed race together, but it does acknowledge that being light skinned does not mean you're mixed race, and being mixed race does not mean you are light skinned. And adding it to the next point, mixed race does not equal browning. And this is the case because someone can be mixed race and not light skinned, and vice versa. There is such thing as dark skinned mixed people, and there are such things as genuine light skinned black people. And here are some of the sources that are used for this last portion that I briefly, emphasis on very briefly, recapped. Before the term browning was used, the words that were used centuries earlier were the same ones that were used in the United States. So essentially, colonial Jamaica used words like mulatto, which is someone who is half black, half white, quadroon, which is someone who's a quarter black, three quarters white, and octoroon, which is someone who is an eighth black and seven eighths white. So a mulatto would be someone who has a black parent, a quadroon would be someone who has a black grandparent, and an octoroon was someone who had a black great grandparent. And this is essentially based on quantum numbers. These terms ended up becoming out of style and out of fashion around the mid 19th century. These classifications began to wane. One of the reasons is that they're just a bit too complicated and people didn't want to go based off of blood quantum. But here are some of the factors as to why these terms weren't really used. The first one is social fluidity. As the mixed race population grew and intermarried, the distinctions between categories became increasingly blurred, making rigid classifications very impractical. Legal changes, post emancipation laws, and societal shifts reduced the emphasis on these classifications, especially as free people of color gained rights and the legal system moved away from race based distinctions. That would be a similarity that I know kind of took place in the United States with the free people of color getting more rights, and a majority of the free people of color in the States were mixed race people. And the third is cultural evolution. So the rise of terms like Browning in Jamaican vernacular reflected a shift from rigid racial categories to more fluid descriptors based on appearance and social status. This is the starting point on how it influenced modern Jamaican identity and social structures. So, during the colonial era, regarding the legacy of the racial classification from the 17th to the 19th centuries, Jamaica operated under a rigid color and class hierarchy. And honestly, it wasn't just Jamaica, it was most, if not all, of the Caribbean as well. Enforcing this through legal, social, and cultural norms. So that's where the terms mulatto, quadroon, and octoroon were weaponized as they're used as legal tools influencing access to education, property rights, and civil liberties. Social signs denoting proximity to whiteness, which meant access to wealth and power, and cultural markers tied to European beauty standards, shaping ideas of desirability and respectability. So, after the colonial era ended, there's a period of emancipation, or a period between emancipation to the early 20th century. And emancipation was in 1838. So essentially, this was mainly from the 19th to the early 20th century. So, during this period of time, free people of color, many of whom were light skinned or mixed race, emphasis on light skin or mixed race, even more emphasis on or, began to accumulate wealth and enter the professional class. While the racial labels became less formal, the association between light skin and privilege persisted still. By the 20th century, the quote unquote brown middle class was firmly entrenched, occupying spaces in education, banking, media, and government. Scholar Deborah A. Thomas notes in Modern Blackness 2004 that the Jamaican middle class has historically been composed disproportionately of lighter skinned individuals due to not only inherited wealth but also access to British style schooling and overseas opportunities. Regarding how this is continuing in modern day Jamaica and essentially the rest of the Caribbean, the Browning ideal is visible in music, advertising, and beauty culture, examples being skin lightening products remaining very popular. Colorism continues to affect dating, hiring, and media representation, often privileging lighter skinned Jamaicans. Yet, post independence nationalism since 1962 has also led to a strong Black Pride movement, especially among poor and darker skinned Jamaicans. We're going to get into this at some point in the video. So, the Browning class is generally used in Jamaica, but I wanted to know how other places in the Caribbean handled their racial classifications and the legacy of colorism in the countries that was used, obviously, is Jamaica, but Barbados, Haiti, and the Dominican Republic. The differences come from their colonial leaders, I guess. Haiti is a French colony, the Dominican Republic is a Spanish colony, and Barbados is an English or a British colony, just like Jamaica. And just to really summarize things briefly, um, the racial system in Jamaica is tripartite, so white, brown, browns generally mixed race people, and black. It's the same thing in Barbados, which isn't shocking at all, but it's apparently a lot more rigid. Haiti has a highly stratified and complex racial system, where in the Dominican Republic, it is very fluid but pro Spanish and pro white. The mixed race class in Jamaica is called the Browning middle class. They didn't really go into what it's called in Barbados, but it's pretty similar. Oh, it's the free colored class, which is a lot smaller than it is in Jamaica and a lot less influential. I wonder why that is. It didn't really go much into detail. In Haiti, the mixed race class is called Gen de Couleur Libre, and they were the elite class. And this really isn't shocking. I'm wondering if they had any ties to the Dominican Republic or just looking the Dominican Republic. Haiti is a very, very, very pro-Black nation, and they have the highest ancestry out of anywhere in the West, so this really isn't shocking to me. And in the Dominican Republic, they're labeled as Indio, which is interesting because genetically they are mulatto, but I guess they just wanted to use that term to state that they weren't Black. That might be something that I have to research more. When it comes to the post colonial racial identity, Jamaica has a huge Black pride identity, though there's persistent colorism. I'm probably going to get into this a lot more since it's contradictory. Barbados has their post-colonial racial identity with class being tied to color, so essentially the same thing as Jamaica, really. In Haiti, the Black identity is very strong and is the foreground of their country post 1804 due to how they became free. Where in the Dominican, their post-colonial racial identity is whitening, major la raza / anti-Black national identity. When you look at the one drop rule, whether they're in any of these countries, there's an overwhelming no. I'm probably going to compare the US to Jamaica when it comes to how they handle their mixed race people. And when it comes to the legacy of colorism, in Jamaica, it's very strong and it's still tied to class. In Barbados, it is strong in elite spaces. In Haiti, it is present but mitigated by Black pride. I'm wondering if they're saying this because Haiti, they actually execute their Black prideness with more genuity and better than Jamaica does, where in Jamaica it's just very contradictory. Where in the Dominican Republic, it is deeply ingrained and it's fueled by anti Haitianism, where they obviously share an island and they assume Black with Haitians and that it is lowly. So here are some of the references that were used for the chart. There are longer explanations that I delved into, but I just summarized it to explain my points briefly using the graph, and you can see the references here. See, I've been hinting at this part for a while since I noticed a contradiction while this conversation was happening and after I've been doing further research. I asked, so Jamaicans and other Caribbean countries had a quote unquote pro Black ideology and motto, but still had beliefs of whiteness, lighter skin, thinner features, and looser hair was better. They associated class and opportunity with Eurocentricity. Isn't this a contradiction to their quote unquote Black pride ideology? Here's what I got. Yes, you're absolutely right to identify that as a deep contradiction, and it's one that scholars, activists, and Caribbean thinkers have wrestled with for generations. Here's a breakdown of how and why this tension exists. I don't know if I'm going to read all of this point by point, but you see it up here. The contradiction: Black pride versus Eurocentric beauty and class ideals. One, postcolonial Black pride ideology. So after independence, it mentions when for Jamaica and Barbados and in the Caribbean in general. Most Caribbean countries embrace a pro-Black Afro-Caribbean national identity, inspired by events like Marcus Garvey's Black nationalism, the Rastafarianism, Pan-Africanist, and anti-colonial movements, and reggae music being seen as something that is very pro-Black. In Jamaica, slogans like out of many, one people, I'm going to get more into that soon, coexisted with growing pride in Black culture, especially in the 1970s under Prime Minister Michael Manley. 2. Colonial residues. Internalized Eurocentrism. Despite this ideology, colonial social structures persisted. Lighter skin, straighter hair, and thinner features continued to be associated with wealth, education, and power. Media, beauty standards, school systems, and the job market often reward proximity to whiteness. The Browning class, light-skinned, mixed-race Jamaicans, yet again, it kind of mixes the two in a weird way here, maintained social dominance in business, media, and politics well after independence. Sociologist Deborah Thomas, in Modern Blackness, dated 2004, argues that many Jamaicans navigate an ambivalent modernity, publicly embracing blackness while still operating within Eurocentric social hierarchies. And this is exactly what I think personally. You look good if you state you're pro-black, you get all these accolades, you're seen as someone who is educated, it seems like you are confident, but when you really break down a lot of these people, they worship light skin, they worship mixed race children, they worship Eurocentricity, they worship thinner features, they are colorist features and textures against their own people. And what's crazy about it is that in these Caribbean countries, black people are the overwhelming majority, but yet you have all of this internalized anti-blackness, but you can't outright express it because people will look at you crazy like you're black, but you're worshipping Eurocentrism. So they have this pro-black image without living that in reality. So why this contradiction exists? So, one, colonial brainwashing and structural power. Centuries of slavery and colonialism entrenched the idea that whiteness equals superiority, and these ideas were embedded in education, religion, and institution. This doesn't disappear just because independence is achieved. And the Jamaican educator Rex Nettleford called this colonial hangover. Independence changed the flag, but not always the minds. But you, as an individual, what are you doing to change this mindset? You, as a community, what are you doing to change this mindset? You can't just blame white people forever. It really has to do with you, especially after hundreds of years. Two, class and color still intertwine, which is just stupid in my opinion, but because lighter skinned groups were historically closer to wealth and access, lightness became a class maker, not just a racial one. And this is probably why there's so much bleaching in the Caribbean and even in Africa, but we're specifically focusing on the Caribbean here, and mainly Jamaica. Upward mobility often meant conforming to Eurocentric norms, straightening hair, changing speed, anglicizing names, etc. And it's crazy even within my own family, just seeing certain things that they do, like, oh, you have to straighten your hair, you have to comb your hair, blah, 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 you have to talk a certain way in public. It's conforming to your centricity, but when you tell them that, they don't see it like that. So just little things like that that happens to a lot of black people, especially Caribbean people, that isn't easily picked up as conforming to your centricity. Three, beauty and desirability politics. This one's pretty obvious. Even with pro-black circles, Eurocentric beauty standards often remain dominant, which is just contradictory in my opinion and shows you're really not pro-black. Skin bleaching is a huge thing in music videos, advertising, TV. You often see lighter skinned people. In the documentary Dark Girls and its Caribbean discussions, many women describe being called pretty for a dark girl, which is a phrase that exposes this deep contradiction because you're saying that dark skinned people on average aren't pretty, and you complimenting someone being pretty, you have to mention their dark skin as almost like an element that would contradict that or that should make them not pretty. Is it a hypocrisy or a legacy of a person? Rather than a pure hypocrisy, I think it's a pure hypocrisy, but this is what they're telling me. It's better understood as a society grappling with the scars of colonization. People can genuinely believe in black pride and still internalize colorism because they are raised in a system that rewards Eurocentric features. But what are you doing to challenge that? If you're not doing anything, you're really not pro-black. Resistance and conformity can coexist in the same society and even in the same person. So, in summary, yes, there's a contradiction. Pro-black ideologies push pride in African roots, but Eurocentric ideals of beauty, class, and status remain deeply embedded, especially in institutions and media. This contradiction reflects the complexity of decolonization. You can change the system on paper, but the psychological and structural legacy of colonialism takes much longer to dismantle. And I personally don't know if people are really doing that work or want to do the work to dismantle it mentally. So the slogan or the national motto in Jamaica is out of many, one people. And I was thinking, okay, was this used as a term to, on paper, encourage national unity amongst races, but in practice, encourage whitening or bettering the race? I thought of this because there's statements in the Latin Caribbean and Latin America, like Mejorar la Raza, where essentially they thought that the best thing for the nation was to whiten their popularity and to get rid of any blackness. So I was wondering if this was kind of the same thing. The purpose of this, once Jamaica became a country in 1962, was to celebrate national unity amongst its racially diverse populations, including African, European, Indian, Chinese, Lebanese, and mixed race Jamaicans. And it was supposed to move Jamaica beyond colonial racial divisions. And it was not officially about encouraging racial mixing or skin lightening, but in actuality is different than on paper, where the model didn't explicitly promote mejorar la raza, which is Spanish for improving the race, i.e., whitening. In practice, it exists where in Jamaica, lighter skinned people held disproportionate power, especially in government, business, and media. Colorism and classism are highly linked together, and Eurocentric beauty standards and behavior norms are still held on a pedestal. So, in a way, it isn't as biologically prescriptive as Spanish colonial ideologies. The motto does help gloss over the racial inequality that happens in Jamaica, and it masks the structural inequality, especially for darker skinned working class Jamaicans, which are the overwhelming majority of the Jamaican population. So my research went on and on and on and on, and so did my conversation with Chat GPT. So I'm going to keep this pretty short and I'm going to end this soon. So I was curious about the Browning class's interactions on a general standpoint with the black community and the white community in Jamaica, and here's what I got. So when it comes to the interactions with the black community, there was social stratification and privilege, where the Browning class knew that they had better access to education and economic opportunities compared to the black majority, which definitely caused tension between the two groups, and this is a result of the system and colonial structures that favored lighter skin toned people. Cultural distinctions. Despite both having African ancestry, though obviously the Browning class would most likely have a lot less, the Browning class sometimes distance themselves culturally from the black community, adopting European customs and norms to align more closely with the white elite. This is something that I'm definitely going to get into. I want to make a comparison to something with the United States, despite them supposedly having different systems when it comes to how they handle the mixed race class. And this element also caused tension between the two groups. Tensions and solidarity. So the Browning class is often alignment with the European standards because both are minorities, but still privileged, has the black people thinking that they are elitist, causing tensions with the black community. And there's also a term where a lot of Browning class people are called uptown, and that's kind of associated with people who are very stushed. That might be another video, and that's something that I want to definitely get into, but that definitely falls into the tensions and solidarity. Despite all of that, both groups face systemic racism and colonial oppression, leading to moments of solidarity, especially during movement for independence and civil rights. Regarding the interactions with the white community, there's an ambiguous acceptance there where the Browning class were given limited inclusion into white dominated spaces, such as certain professions or social events, but rarely achieved full acceptance. So that's the general story for all mixed race people, but I guess things never change no matter where you are in the world. Social mobility constraints. Despite their proximity to whiteness, they were never accepted to being fully white, and they faced barriers to upward mobility within the white elite, highlighting the rigid racial hierarchies of the time and still kind of today. Cultural mediation. The Browning class sometimes acted as intermediaries between the black and white communities, facilitating communal and cultural exchange, though this can cause tension with them and both other communities. So the last part, or the part before, but it just very recently mentioned something about the Browning class distancing themselves from black people to align more with whiteness. So I wanted more information on this. So I asked ChatGPT what the Browning individuals were encouraged to distance themselves from the black population akin to the quote unquote black, and I put in brackets, really mixed or white one drop ruler, American to path to be white. Because, in my opinion, it was a similar pathology there, despite the different racial functions between the two countries. Here's what I got. Yes, the dynamic you're describing has a clear dynamic you are describing has clear parallels between Browning Jamaicans who were encouraged to distance themselves from the black majority and the mixed race or light skinned African Americans who, quote unquote, passed for white under the US one drop rule system. However, the ideological and structural frameworks differ due to the contrasting racial systems in the British Caribbean and the United States. Similarities between Jamaican Brownings and American passers. 1. Strategic racial distance for social mobility. In both Jamaica and the US, lighter skin and European features provided a social advantage. Browning Jamaicans often aligned themselves with white or colonial values to gain access to education, land, and professions. In the US, mixed race individuals who could pass for white or really just white one droppers, especially in the northern US, where a lot of them either migrated to or they just lived there, and in the north, there tended to be more admixed or white people who were one dropped in there. To escape Jim Crow oppression and jobs accessibility, schools or housing restricted to the white, especially with that being more prominent in the South than the North, the Jim Crow laws I'm referring to. 2. Internalized color hierarchies. In both societies, white supremacy and Eurocentric beauty standards created internalized hierarchies. In Jamaica, this meant brown privilege. Light-skinned people often received better treatment in schools, job markets, and even relationships. In the US, passing required full disassociation from black identity, which sometimes led to permanent separation from family or community. 3. Class and racial identity becoming entangled. Jamaican Brownings often became a part of the uptown elite. I briefly mentioned the term uptown. I delve more into that in this conversation, but I'm not going to add that to this video. You pretty much get what I'm referencing with that, especially during post-emancipation urbanization. Uptown was associated with middle and upper class refinement, education, and usually lighter skin. In the US, passing often involved climbing the ladder into the white, middle, or upper class life, marrying white partners, joining white institutions, etc. Key differences. Racial system. Jamaica, in brackets, British less colonial, graded caste system, so from white to browning to black. The United States, one drop rule, a binary system, white versus black, and white represented purity and black represented everything else, the trash that us white people don't want to accept because they'll ruin our purity and that BS supremacist rhetoric that I don't give a crap about. Mixed race status. In Jamaica, it's recognized as a separate intermediate class. In the United States, the mixed race status is considered fully black under the one drop rule. When it comes to the mobility, in Jamaica, some Brownings gained elite status while still identifying as mixed. That's the main identifier and difference here. In the United States, they had to pass as white and often sympathize with blackness. Legal framework. In Jamaica, mixed people could be legally free and hold property. In the United States, they legally classified as black and were subjected to discrimination. Conclusion. While Browning Jamaicans did not pass in the same way that African Americans did, because their racial identity was explicitly acknowledged and still offered some privilege, the psychological and social pressure to dissociate from blackness and embrace Eurocentric traits were quite similar. Both systems upheld white/light skin preference, but manifested it through different mechanisms of classification and mobility. Obviously, there's a lot more to the conversation that I just don't feel like getting into right now, and I'm going to start concluding the video. In conclusion, the Browning class is a term that is a bit too flexible for my liking, but it generally references mixed race people, though it also lumps in light skinned people. There are times where they use those terms interchangeably, while other times they acknowledge them as two different things, but it's clear that it's in reference to skin color being associated with class as well as other features compared to the monoracial brown to dark skinned, 4C hair, wide broad feature Jamaicans that are the overwhelming majority. And it also just shows how colonialism still has mental effects on a lot of Black people in Jamaica, though a lot of it is by choice, in my opinion. And this brings up a point that Spice from Love and Hip Hop, who is the woman in this picture, this isn't how she looks. She intentionally lightened herself for a specific purpose. She didn't really bleach, but she was talking about bleaching in Jamaica and in the Black community and how it affects people like herself. But she was talking about this to a lot of Black Americans, and some of them were lighter skinned and they really just didn't understand the concept. And this is due to lighter skinned people and especially mixed race people being treated differently in the United States compared to Jamaica. And it's a very interesting dichotomy there. And it also just shows me how there are many similarities and many differences when it comes to the racial structures in many other countries, whether it's in the Caribbean or even the United States. This is something that I'm probably going to do more videos about, delving deeper into the Browning class or the equivalencies in other Caribbean countries, maybe do more comparisons of the United States, and maybe talk more about the figures that are in this Browning class. Anyways, thank you all for watching, and I'll be back with more soon for sure. Take care.